Well, Trump's transition team reportedly in disarray. We look at that and who could get the top posts. Then we're going to bring in our panel of attorneys. We're going to discuss all the outstanding lawsuits that both Trump and his companies could face and the possible conflicts of interest as Trump and his kids transition to the White House. Also, our conversation with incoming Westchester DA Anthony Scarpino. We'll talk about what his plans are for both the county and what a Trump presidency might mean on issues like immigration. Evening, everybody, and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. Thank you so much for joining us this Wednesday evening, our first episode of As the Transition Turns. Well, the Trump transition looking a bit like a soap opera. Chris Christie, he's out. Mike Pence in charge now. Power struggles are popping up, and Donald Trump trying to tamp down reports that things are a hot mess. And Trump's own son-in-law, Jared Kushner, reportedly at the center of all, purging people who had ties to Christie. As a federal prosecutor, you may remember, Christie sent Kushner's dad to prison. And it gets even messier from there.
Went very, very well.
The transition of power continues. Vice President Joe Biden sitting down with VP-elect and transition team leader Mike Pence in Washington today, as Pence deals with his very long to-do list that critics say is clouded in confusion. One of Trump's top national security advisors reportedly forced to resign. Governor Chris Christie ousted, Ben Carson declining consideration for a potential Trump cabinet spot, and Democrats on the Hill up in arms over Trump's new White House counselor, Stephen Bannon, and his ties to the alt-right and white nationalists.
The beginning of any transition like this has turmoil.
Team Trump reminding reporters that their transition timeline matches other administrations, as Trump continues to host a steady stream of potential cabinet nominees at Trump Tower in New York City.
Well, you don't form a federal government overnight, and these are very serious issues, very serious appointments.
But not everyone is excited to be associated with the Trump brand. Trump's name, it was removed from a few buildings in Manhattan after residents petitioned to have it changed last month. And just like many parts of the country, protests have rocked Trump's hometown nearly every day since he was elected. New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio, he met with Trump today to voice the protesters' concerns.
I also raised concerns about some of the messages and some of the rhetoric that for so many people have been hurtful.
All right, let me bring in my good friend Dominic Carter here, who's a political journalist and author. And Dominic, the names, they keep coming in here in all different shapes and sizes as to who may or may not. We're hearing again from one of the Trumps that we could be getting a few names sooner than later. But I want to just give some of the names being considered. We talked about this, you and I, yesterday, and a name New Yorkers know very well. Rudy Giuliani, potentially a Secretary of State. It should be noted that Rudy, there are more than a few concerns with Rudy Giuliani. Forget the fact that he has no foreign policy experience. It's that some of his business ties could complicate the nomination. Wilbur Ross, former investment firm founder, could be Commerce Secretary. Jeff Sessions, Defense Secretary, is one of the few members of the U.S. Senate, a Republican, who actually stood by Trump through all of this. Forget that he's a climate change denier. He'd be an interesting pick. I cannot make this up. Sarah Palin. She's made it known, just as Rudy, that she'd like to be a member of the cabinet. Trump said he'd like her to be part of the cabinet. Imagine her potentially as Interior Secretary. Yeah. And Michael McCaul, he's former governor of Texas, Homeland Security Secretary. But I've got a few other names here, guys, that you cannot make up as well, including among them Joe Arpaio. Remember the crazy sheriff? Apparently, he's had a meeting with Trump. He'd like to be the Homeland Security chief. Crazy.
That was under criminal investigation.
Yes, exactly.
That sheriff,
the one
Joe?
who just lost.
Right.
As America's sheriff, he would dress all the inmates up in pink. He would do all that bit.
Wow.
He's a name. Laura Ingraham, many of you may know from right-wing radio. She could be the press secretary. She went on Fox last night and says, we're talking about it. Another name here that, when we say State Department, Rudy, but James Bolton, who we talked about, the guy who wanted to basically get rid of 10 floors at the UN. He didn't want to just attack Iraq. He wanted to attack militarily. Iran as well. Yes, he'd be considered as the diplomatic voice here potentially. And just a local name, Rob Astorino, reportedly, without confirmation, would be considered by HUD to be the HUD Secretary, Housing and Urban Development. He, of course, and the county is not only had funding held by HUD, but there is an active investigation and a case against the county for being non-compliant, and specifically the county chair. But he would potentially be considered for that very thing. You cannot make all this up. But Dom, at the center of it is palace intrigue. The son-in-law, and we're getting various reports as to whether he acted alone or not. This is the part I don't get. Now help me out. Sure, Trump did it his way. You want to quote Frankie Sinatra, go for it. But they set up a transition team, and they said, okay, Christie, you go ahead and you spend the next 60, 90 days picking people. Apparently got some legit folks here that, you know, Mike Rogers, formerly a member of the House, former FBI guy long-term, he was picking up national security names and everyone else. He was summarily shown the door yesterday because he was brought in by Rudy, not because of his bona fides. They basically starting from scratch right now. You got Trump tweeting in the middle of the night, and a lot of this has to do that Jared Kushner's old man was sent away by Chris Christie when he was a federal prosecutor because the dad, tax evasion, witness tampering. Remember the story where the guy tried to get somebody to sleep with his brother-in-law, then he sent the tape to the sister, and it all didn't work out. Well, apparently the son hasn't forgotten it. But this isn't just sticking it to Christie. You don't start from scratch with less than 2 months till you got to put your hand on the Bible and do the inauguration.
I agree with everything you said and more. This is turning out to be the gang that couldn't shoot straight. Things are just not looking good. The president-elect, as you would expect, he sends out a tweet that everything is going great and so on. You talk about rose-colored glasses.
But also, Dom, he says, I'm the only one,
Right.
Donald Trump, that's
Right.
going to pick the finalists.
Right.
Like it's a reality show.
It
That there's a
is.
rose at the end.
It is. It's called, the reality show was his administration, and we're the audience. We're the. I was almost going to say we're the suckers, but but that's not a good term. So, but Richard, it's outrageous, and you know, the conventional wisdom, as to your point of what you just made, is that Trump didn't believe he was going to win, so they gave Christie a job that it would mean nothing. Head of the transition. Transition means nothing if you're not going to win.
That's what I was going to ask you. Don't you think that at the root of it, that's a big part of this, that they're fighting tooth and nail here in the end to be relevant and everything else? But if they thought they could win, they certainly would have ramped this thing up ahead of time. Clearly, they were as surprised as everybody else by what happened Tuesday night.
No doubt about it. And they've been caught, you know, with their pants down, or whatever term you want to use. And now the president-elect is behind the 8 ball and meeting with de Blasio today and holding these meetings. And let's not forget ditching the White House press corps because he went to dinner last night. The moment that you become president-elect, there's a press corps, as you well know, that travels with you everywhere you go. He said, nah, I don't think so.
Just before people say, oh, who cares, boo-hoo media. Remember when the press corps was with George W. Bush when he was in that Florida classroom when an aide gave him a note about what was happening in New York, and then soon thereafter, obviously, at the Pentagon and in the Florida field with the attacks of 9/11. Remember what happened if you didn't have press corps following Ronald Reagan when, we know when a gunman took a shot at him. I can go up and down the list here, but there is a reason. The election mattered. It's not a show anymore. There are certain rules you have to comport by, and I would hope somebody would take his Twitter account away from him. You're the president-elect right now. And then forget about policy. We'll get into that tomorrow. But Assad now saying basically he's got a friend in Trump. They have common interests. This is moving quickly. If you believe the Trump folks, they've got their act together, and this is just the media, guys like me and Dom looking for a story. I wish it was as simple as that, okay? There are going to be some choppy waters here. I have a feeling, and I feel I'm pretty much on safe ground on that one here for the next month or so. Dominic, thank you.
Thank you.
I'm sure we'll have a lot more in the headlines tomorrow. Now, coming up next, Trump's companies, they have business in hotspots like China and Russia, at least that we know of, since we still haven't seen those tax returns. And President Trump will, of course, be dealing with those countries on a host of issues. Plus, Trump kids will still be running the family business, but yet, will they have access to national security, very sensitive information? We're going to bring in our panel of attorneys here to take a look at all the possible pitfalls and complications of that.